She leaned closer, her voice barely above a breath. Keep this secret, just between us. In that moment, I knew something had shifted, not in her, but in me. What began as a simple promise would soon become the one truth I could never share. It began on one of those late summer evenings when the air still held the warmth of the day, but the light was already turning gold. My best friend, Daniel, had asked me to stop by and help his mom with a few boxes in the garage. I almost said no. I was tired, and the day had been long, but something in his tone made me agree. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if that single decision changed everything. Mrs. Hale opened the door before I could knock. She smiled, the kind of smile that felt both welcoming and distant, as if she was letting me in, but only so far. Her hair was tied loosely, a few strands escaping to frame her face. The soft scent of lavender drifted toward me, the same perfume I remembered from when Daniel and I were kids. It was strange how a single smell could pull you back through years in an instant. Inside, the house looked exactly as I remembered it, but quieter somehow. The faint hum of a ceiling fan, a stack of unopened mail on the counter, sunlight falling across the hardwood floor, all of it felt frozen in time. We started sorting through old boxes in the garage. Some were filled with photographs, others with her late husband's things, tools, old jackets, memories too heavy to throw away. She moved carefully, her hands brushing dust from a picture frame before setting it aside. Every time she smiled, there was a flicker of something behind it, something tired, but graceful. "You've changed," she said suddenly, glancing over her shoulder. I laughed. "Hopefully for the better." She smiled faintly. "No, not just that. You carry yourself differently now. Like life's already tested you a bit." Her words hit deeper than I expected. No one had noticed that before. I didn't know how to reply, so I just smiled. When Daniel left to grab food, the evening grew still. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the floor. She stayed behind, sorting through papers, while I leaned against a beam, unsure what to do with the silence. Then she spoke again, softer this time. "You remind me of your father, you know. He always had this calm way about him. Kind eyes." Her gaze lingered a moment too long. My heart caught in my chest. She turned away quickly, her tone light again. "Thank you for helping today. Daniel means well, but he never gets around to things." As I nodded, she stepped closer, close enough for me to feel the faint warmth of her presence, to notice the delicate tremor in her breath. "Let's keep this our little secret," she said with a small smile. "Daniel would only make a joke out of it." Her voice was casual, but something in it stayed with me. Maybe it was the way her eyes softened, or the way she said our secret, like the words carried a meaning even she didn't fully intend. When I left that evening, the scent of lavender followed me out the door, and for the first time, I realized that sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that never let you go. The days that followed were ordinary, at least that's what I told myself. But ordinary things started to feel different. Passing by her street, I'd catch myself slowing down, looking toward the porch as if by accident. Sometimes she was there, watering the plants, her hair pulled back, her posture relaxed but graceful. Other times, the house looked empty, and I'd keep driving, pretending I wasn't disappointed. I started finding reasons to stop by. Returning a borrowed wrench. Asking about a recipe she'd once made. Checking on Daniel's dog when he was out. Little excuses that sounded harmless enough, but each visit carried an undercurrent I couldn't quite define. The first time I saw her alone after that evening, it was raining. The kind of steady rain that makes the world quiet. She stood by the living room window, a cup of tea in her hand, her gaze distant. I hesitated at the doorway, unsure whether to speak. Then she turned, her eyes lighting up with that familiar, gentle warmth. "You always seem to show up when it rains," she said with a small laugh. "Maybe I just like the quiet," I replied. She motioned for me to sit. The room was dim, lit only by the soft gray light filtering through the curtains. The scent of wet earth drifted in through the open window. We talked about simple things, work, the weather, Daniel's new job. But beneath every word, there was a quiet awareness either of us named. When I told her about feeling lost, about how my plans never seemed to line up with where I wanted to be, she listened without interruption. Her attention was steady, unhurried, the way people listen when they truly care. After a long pause, she set her cup down and reached across the small space between us. Her hand brushed mine, not by accident, but softly, intentionally. Her touch was light, yet it stilled everything in me. "You're not lost," she said. "You just haven't found someone who looks at you the way you deserve to be seen." Her voice was low, almost a whisper. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The rain filled the silence that followed, each drop against the glass marking time we both wished wouldn't move. When she finally withdrew her hand, the warmth of her skin lingered against mine, refusing to fade. She stood and smiled as if nothing had changed. But everything had. As I left, she walked me to the door. "Drive safe," she said. "And don't tell Daniel you were here. He'll think I've stolen his best friend." We both laughed, but beneath it, something trembled, a line neither of us wanted to cross, yet neither could ignore. That night, lying awake, I thought about her words, "You haven't found someone who sees you yet." And I wondered, for the first time, if maybe she already had. It was a Saturday evening when she called. Her voice carried a softness I hadn't heard before, careful, hesitant, like she'd been debating whether to reach out at all. Daniel was out of town for the weekend, and she asked if I could help fix a flickering light in the kitchen. It was an easy task, something I could have brushed off. But the moment she said, "Only if you're free," I was already reaching for my jacket. The house greeted me in a hush. The late sun spilled through the curtains in long golden bands, catching the dust in the air. She was standing on a small step ladder, arms stretched up toward the ceiling, the hem of her soft gray sweater lifting just slightly as she reached. Her voice startled me from the quiet. "Oh, good you came," she said, glancing over her shoulder with that gentle smile. "This thing's been flickering for days." When the bulb slipped from her hand, instinct took over. I caught it before it hit the ground, my fingers brushing hers in the process. It was only a second, but her hand froze in mine. For that single heartbeat, everything stilled. Her skin was warm, and her breath caught just audibly enough for me to notice. Then she laughed, a quiet, nervous sound. "Guess I'm not as steady as I used to be," she said, looking away. "You're steady enough," I replied, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. She stepped down from the ladder, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. The room seemed smaller now, or maybe we were just more aware of it. She made tea afterward, pouring mine first, her fingers grazing mine again when she handed me the cup. Neither of us mentioned it. We sat by the window as dusk deepened, the light between us fading into that kind of silence that's both comfortable and charged. She talked about her husband, how quiet the house had become since he passed, how sometimes she still caught herself setting out 2 plates for dinner. Her honesty felt fragile, like glass. I listened, careful not to interrupt. "I think," she said after a pause, "the hardest part isn't being alone. It's being unseen. You start wondering if you've already lived all the good parts of your life." Without thinking, I answered, "You haven't. You make everyone around you feel seen. Maybe you just need someone to do that for you." The words hung there, raw, honest, too revealing. She looked at me, her eyes steady and searching, as if trying to decide whether I meant it. Then, softly, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, she said, "Maybe I already have." Her gaze didn't waver. Neither did mine. The sound of the rain tapping against the window filled the space between us, and in that stillness, she whispered, almost to herself, "Keep this secret, just between us." I didn't answer. I just nodded. Because deep down, I already knew this was no longer just a secret. It was something neither of us could put into words, and neither of us could undo. After that night, the world around us seemed unchanged, but I wasn't. Every ordinary moment had begun to feel heavier, threaded with something unspoken. When Daniel and I hung out, I found myself distracted, glancing toward the hallway whenever I visited his house. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of her, passing quietly, pretending not to notice me, and it was enough to twist something inside me that I couldn't explain. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of secrecy settled between us. Small exchanges became our language, a nod when we passed in the driveway, a half smile when no one else was looking, a text message that said nothing but meant everything. She was careful, always careful, but I could tell the secrecy weighed on her. The quiet between us was growing louder, and I think she felt it too. One afternoon, she called me unexpectedly. Her voice sounded tired. "Could you stop by?" she asked. "There's something wrong with the garden hose." When I arrived, she was kneeling in the yard, sunlight tangled in her hair. She looked up, brushing soil from her hands, and for a moment, everything felt simple again. But as I walked closer, I saw the uncertainty in her eyes, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. We fixed the hose easily, but neither of us left. We ended up sitting on the porch steps, our knees almost touching, watching the light fade through the trees. "I keep thinking about that night," she said quietly. "I didn't ask which one, we both knew." She sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "It's strange, isn't it? How something can feel so right and so wrong at the same time." I swallowed hard. "I know." She turned her head slightly, her gaze finding mine. "I didn't mean to make things complicated for you." "You didn't," I said, though we both knew that wasn't true. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain again. Her hair brushed against my arm, and I had to stop myself from reaching out. Everything about that moment felt fragile, suspended, like one wrong word could make it all shatter. "I can't let anyone misunderstand," she whispered. "You know how people talk." I nodded, though it hurt to agree. The distance she was trying to rebuild between us was already there, but it didn't stop the ache that came with it. When I finally stood to leave, she reached out, just a brief touch on my sleeve. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "Thank you for keeping this between us." I managed a small smile, though it felt hollow. "Always." Driving home, the street lights blurred through my windshield. Her words replayed in my head, not as a promise, but as a boundary either of us could seem to respect. It was then I realized that secrets don't just stay hidden, they grow roots. And the longer you keep them, the deeper they pull you in. After that afternoon on the porch, things changed, not dramatically, but enough to notice. She stopped calling. The texts that once came every few days no longer appeared. Even when I dropped by with Daniel, she seemed distant, polite, composed, as if the quiet between us had been carefully folded and hidden away. At first, I told myself it was for the best. We had crossed too many unspoken lines. Maybe a little space would make it easier to breathe again. But it didn't. It only made the silence louder. I'd catch myself remembering the way she'd smile mid-sentence, how her eyes softened when she listened, how her voice lowered whenever we were alone, not because she needed to whisper, but because it made everything feel closer. Weeks passed. I tried to move on, focusing on work, friends, routine, but every time it rained I thought of her. I thought of that night by the window, the quiet tea, her hand brushing mine. Memories became ghosts that refused to fade. Then one evening, Daniel mentioned she hadn't been feeling well. Without thinking, I asked if she needed help around the house. He shrugged, saying she'd been keeping to herself. The concern in his tone was light, but it lingered with me. That night, I drove past her house. The lights were dim except for one in the kitchen. I saw her silhouette move briefly behind the curtain, then disappear. 2 days later, I stopped by uninvited. I brought flowers, though I wasn't sure why. She opened the door wearing a loose cardigan, her hair undone, eyes tired but warm. "I wasn't expecting you," she said softly. "I know. I just wanted to check in." For a moment, I thought she'd tell me to leave. But instead, she stepped aside. "Come in." The house felt colder than I remembered. She'd been fighting a cold, she said. I offered to make tea, and she let me, quietly watching as I moved around her kitchen, finding everything as if I'd always belonged there. When I handed her the cup, her fingers brushed mine again. The touch sent a rush of warmth through me, not because of the tea, but because it felt like a bridge across all the distance she'd built. "I thought maybe you didn't want to see me anymore," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. She looked down, her voice trembling slightly. "It's not that. It's just easier to miss something quietly than to explain it to people who wouldn't understand." Her eyes met mine again, honest, tired, beautiful. "You've been kind to me in ways I didn't expect. And that's exactly why I had to pull back." I didn't argue. I just sat beside her in the stillness, the sound of the kettle humming in the background. Sometimes silence says what words never can. And in that silence I understood, she wasn't pushing me away out of indifference. She was doing it because she cared too much. It was late autumn when everything came undone, the kind of evening where the air feels heavy before a storm. The sky was low and gray, the wind sharp enough to make the trees bend. Daniel had gone out of town again for work, and I told myself I was just checking in on her. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just concern that brought me there. The rain began as I parked outside. Her porch light glowed faintly through the mist, and when she opened the door, the sight of me seemed to pull both surprise and relief into her eyes. She stepped aside silently, letting me in without a word. Inside, the lights were low, a single lamp casting a soft gold hue across the room. The faint scent of cinnamon and rain hung in the air. She'd been reading, a blanket draped across her legs, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her. "I thought you might be lonely," I said quietly, shrugging off my jacket. She smiled faintly, the corners of her lips barely curving. "You always know when to appear." For a long moment neither of us moved. The thunder rumbled in the distance, low and patient. Finally, she gestured for me to sit. We talked, at first about nothing. The weather. Her garden. Daniel's trip. But every word we exchanged seemed to circle the truth we'd been avoiding for months. At one point, she paused mid-sentence. Her eyes softened, and she said, "You've been carrying something, haven't you?" I didn't answer right away. My chest felt tight, my thoughts tangled between what was right and what was real. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe it's the same thing you've been carrying too." Her breath caught. She looked away, her fingers tightening around the edge of her blanket. "You shouldn't say that." "But it's true," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't pretend I don't feel it anymore." The rain outside deepened, filling the silence that followed. When she finally looked at me again, her eyes shimmered with something between sorrow and relief. "I told myself this couldn't happen," she said softly. "You're too young and you're you," I interrupted gently. "That's all that matters to me." She shook her head, her composure breaking for the first time. "People wouldn't understand." "Then we don't tell them," I said. "We keep it where it's always been, between us." Her lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. The storm outside broke then, rain crashing against the windows, wind howling through the trees. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to my chest, her hands trembling. For a long time, we stayed like that, no words, no promises, just the sound of rain and the steady rhythm of her breathing against me. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "Whatever happens, promise me one thing." "What's that?" I asked. "Don't regret this, even if we have to let it go." And as the storm raged on, I realized she wasn't asking for forever. She was asking me to remember that even something impossible could still be real. The morning after the storm, the world felt washed clean. The rain had left everything glistening, the roads, the trees, even the air seemed to hum with a quiet stillness. But inside me, there was no calm. Just the echo of her voice from the night before. "Don't regret this, even if we have to let it go." I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes I saw her, the way her head had rested against my chest, the tremor in her breath, the weight of what we'd both finally admitted. It wasn't a confession of love in words, but in everything else, in silence, in touch, in all the things we couldn't bring ourselves to say out loud. The next few days passed in a blur. I didn't hear from her, and I didn't try to reach out. Maybe I was afraid she changed her mind. Maybe I was afraid she hadn't. When I finally saw her again, it was unplanned. Daniel had called. His mom was hosting a small dinner, and he wanted me to come. I said yes before I could think of a reason to refuse. Walking up to her porch that evening felt different than before. The same lavender scent lingered in the air, but the door felt heavier beneath my hand. She greeted me with a smile that was kind, composed, but her eyes gave everything away. There was warmth, yes, but also restraint. Throughout dinner, we barely spoke directly. She laughed easily with Daniel, asked about my work, moved through the evening like nothing had ever happened. But every time our eyes met, there was that quiet current beneath the surface, something alive, something still burning. When Daniel went to the kitchen, I found her by the back door, looking out into the fading light. For a long moment, we stood there, not touching, not speaking. Then she said, "You've always been good at keeping secrets." I smiled faintly. "Only the ones worth keeping." Her breath caught, just slightly. "Then keep this one safe, too. Whatever it was, whatever it still is, let it stay untouched by everything outside these walls." I wanted to say I couldn't. That I wanted her in the open, in the sunlight, not hidden between pauses and glances. But I knew that wasn't possible. Life had already written her story, and I was just a small, unexpected chapter she would one day turn back to quietly. So I nodded. "I will." She reached out then, brushing her hand against my sleeve. "You've grown into someone good," she said softly. "Don't let this be the thing that makes you doubt that." When I left that night, the air was cool, the stars faint through the lingering clouds. I looked back once. She was still standing by the door, her silhouette framed by the warm light inside. And as I walked away, I realized she hadn't asked me to forget. She'd only asked me to remember, gently, quietly, the way we began, the way it felt, and the promise that some secrets aren't meant to be broken, only cherished.